Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking you into a story of geopolitical crisis, but also just pure, unadulterated terror. The kind of story that feels like it belongs in a movie until you realize every chilling detail actually happened. We're going back to March of 1970. We're going to dissect the unbelievable incident of Japan Airlines Flight 351, a crisis that became known as the Yodo Nine case. And this wasn't, a simple hijacking. This was a high-stakes three-nation drama that pitted this young, extreme ideology against Cold War military strategy. JAL 351, it starts its day completely normally, takes off from Tokyo Haneda, heading for Fukuoka. On board, you have 129 people, a real cross-section of society. You've got a famous rock band bassist, a high-level Pepsi executive, even a Catholic priest visiting from New York. But the terror didn't come from hardened criminals looking for money. It came from 9 young, radicalized university students. Their mission wasn't ransom. It was political asylum and military training. They wanted to go to a communist state so they could come back and start a revolution.
And that's what's so fascinating here, the almost theatrical level of their commitment. This wasn't a spontaneous act. They were part of a splinter group called the Yodo Go, which was later tied to the Japanese Red Army. They were driven by these far-left Marxist ideals, and they specifically rejected Japan's post-World War II constraints. For them, this hijacking was their only ticket out, their only way to become armed revolutionary.
Okay, let's get to the moment the flight turns into an absolute nightmare. It's been in the air for just 20 minutes, cruising at 31,000 feet, right over the iconic Mount Fuji. It's about 7:30 in the morning. The leader, a young man named Takamatamiya, he just stands up. You can imagine the confusion, this wave of disbelief, a student making an announcement. It must have seemed like a prank. That confusion ended instantly. Tamiya reveals his weapon, and he hadn't brought a small gun or, a knife. He brandished a massive samurai sword.
The fact that a historical weapon like that could even get through security, it just shows you how unprepared the world was for air piracy back in 1970. I mean, aviation security was almost non-existent compared to what we have today. The second that sword appeared, the threat level just went to maximum.
Absolutely. And then the other 8 hijackers, and one of them was only 16 years old, they solidify the threat. They show handguns and what they claim are bombs. The message was terrifyingly clear. You comply, or all 129 of us are going to die in midair. Their initial demand was Cuba. They wanted the backing of a powerful communist ally, but their whole grand ideological plan had this massive logistical flaw.
A huge one.
The plane was a domestic airliner. It just didn't have the fuel. It couldn't cross the Pacific.
And this is where you see the pilot's extraordinary presence of mind. The hijackers, they're running on pure adrenaline and ideology. They hadn't thought about basic physics. So when they were forced to adapt, they settled on the nearest viable option for military training: North Korea, and they demand the pilot change course for Pyongyang.
But the pilot, he realized he had to buy time. He somehow convinces Tamiya that the aircraft has to refuel. He frames it as being essential for the success of their mission, not as an act of surrender, just brilliant thinking under pressure. And that led to a tense stop at Fukuoka, back in Japan. And here, a true hero of this story emerges. Deputy Transport Minister Shinjiro Yamamura. He arrives to lead the negotiations. Yamamura manages to get a small but absolutely critical victory, the release of 23 hostages.
Mostly women, children, and 1 elderly passenger.
But that still left 100 souls trapped on that plane, so the plane takes off again. The atmosphere on board must have been just terrifying. They were flying toward the demilitarized zone, the DMZ.
38th parallel. One of the most volatile borders in the entire world, and this was only years after the armistice, the total flashpoint.
And because there were American citizens on board, that priest and the executive, the CIA, South Korea, and Japan, they all converge on this desperate, high-risk plan. They decide to lure the hijackers into a trap. The plan was to bring JAL 351 down at Gimpo Airport in South Korea, but make it look completely 100% like Pyongyang.
The level of deception was just. It was cinematic. South Korean officials scrambled. They flew in North Korean flags, plastered them everywhere. They hurriedly dressed their soldiers in North Korean uniforms. They even blasted the North Korean national anthem over the loudspeakers and made these official-sounding announcements. Welcome to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
They pulled out all the stops, an entire international airport staged to look like it was in another country, but the operation failed. It failed at the very last second. Tamiya and his crew, they were suspicious. They saw right through the elaborate staging.
What tipped them off?
2 things, 2 crucial things. First, the conspicuous absence of the huge portraits of the leader, Kim Il-sung. They would have been everywhere in a real Pyongyang airport.
Right, ubiquitous.
Second, they spotted U.S. and European vehicles. And some distinct aircraft models off in the distance, they realized they'd been duped. The plane doors slammed shut. They refused to deplane.
And the trap backfires horribly.
The standoff just escalates immediately. The hijackers are enraged, and they are absolutely ready to follow through on their threats. That standoff stretches into the next day, April 1st, 1970. Japanese officials are stuck. They're trapped between the hijackers' demands and the very real possibility that South Korea might just launch a military raid.
Which would have been a catastrophe, a bloodbath.
So how do they navigate that? They can't move forward. They can't retreat.
They needed a bargaining chip. Something.
Yeah.
Someone. More valuable than the 100 passengers. And that is when Minister Yamamura steps forward with this just extraordinary counteroffer.
He offered himself. He argued that as a deputy transport minister, he was a more valuable guarantee for their safe passage to North Korea than any number of ordinary hostages. An unbelievable gamble. He put himself directly in harm's way for 100 strangers, and his proposal, it was accepted. This leads to one of the most nail-biting exchange rituals you can imagine. How did it even work? How did they prevent betrayal?
It was this complex ballet of total distrust. The hijackers demanded a very meticulous, controlled swap. The remaining 100 hostages were released one by one. For every single hostage who walked down those steps to freedom, one of the Yodo Nine walked down with them, verified they were free, and then immediately walked back up.
Wow. So they repeated that process meticulously until all 100 were off the plane. It must have taken hours, watching one person gain their freedom, only to see a hijacker walk right back up those steps and slam the door. By April 3rd, the plane was sealed for the last time. It finally took off for the real Pyongyang, and on board were just 13 people, the 3 crew members, the 9 hijackers, and the one self-sacrificing Minister Yamamura. That evening, they landed. Successfully in Pyongyang. Tamiya and the Yodo Nine were jubilant. They'd done it. They'd achieved their goal. But it was only when the aircraft was inspected that this truly bizarre, almost farcical detail emerged.
The final tally on their terrorist arsenal.
It was stunning. Over half the weapons they had used to hold the world hostage were fake.
They pulled it off with a handful of real guns, the theatrical threat of that samurai sword, and just pure, audacious bluster. An international crisis, hijacked with dummy weapons.
Yamamura and the flight crew, they were treated honorably by the North Koreans, and thankfully they returned safely to Japan within a few days.
For the Yodo Nine, though, the victory was short-lived. Kim Il-sung did not allow them to proceed to Cuba. He didn't want to look subservient. Instead, he saw them as assets. They were granted political asylum, but were basically isolated in a segregated compound in Pyongyang, a place they ended up calling Little Japan.
They weren't just granted asylum, were they? They were put to work immediately.
Precisely. They were trained and indoctrinated to be North Korean assets, spies. Their Japanese citizenship made them perfect for foreign espionage. A North Korean passport would have drawn immediate scrutiny. And their other chilling task was to expand that spy network, often by luring or recruiting Japanese women to the compound to marry them.
And their fates over the next few decades, they just fragmented, tragically. Tamiya, the leader, died in North Korea in 1995. Shibata, who was the youngest member, he was caught back in Japan in 1988 after being sent on a mission. He later cooperated, admitted his actions came from, self-delusion.
Another one, Tanaka, was caught in 1996 smuggling millions in counterfeit US dollars, a clear sign of their ongoing work for Pyongyang. He died in prison.
And today, it's believed only 5, maybe 4 of the original 9 are still alive in that isolated community in North Korea. And then there is the heartbreaking postscript for the man who saved 100 lives. Minister Shinjiro Yamamura returned home a national hero, but in 1992, he was tragically murdered by his own mentally ill daughter.
It's a final, cruel twist of fate. The man who willingly traded himself for the safety of strangers meets his end years later in this profoundly personal, violent act. It just adds another layer of agonizing tragedy to the whole story.
The Yodo Nine case, it remains one of the most bizarre and tense chapters of the Cold War. A fusion of extreme ideology, political maneuvering, and just profound heroism. And the mystery that lingers today is, are the remaining members still in North Korea truly reformed? Or are they still active espionage assets? We know some have asked to come back to Japan, admitting the hijacking was just an act of foolish self-absorption. It really forces you to think about how far political conviction can push young people, and what the real cost of asylum can be. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into a dark, gripping narrative. If you want more stories that delve into the darkness of history and true crime, be sure to hit like, share this story, and subscribe to our channel, Horror Doc. Until next time, take care of yourselves.